Hello and welcome. I'm Emma Kate Austin here with Miami Heat reporter Ira Winderman. We are so excited for the very first episode of Ask Ira Live.
Finally live. No more mailbag, no more computer, the real thing. So you got me prisoner here, folks. Send those questions.
Yes, we're so excited. So much to talk about. It's a lot going on. During the show, you can still submit questions on our website. It's on Sentinel.com, on Twitter with hashtag AskIra. On the YouTube page as well. So keep those questions coming. We will get to them. Before we get into the questions, though, I think there's one big thing on the mind of a lot of Miami Heat fans, Hassan Whiteside and his injury. So could you kind of just to give us a reminder, kind of the background on his injury, how that happened, and kind of the status?
Well, and that's the interesting thing about all of this is how did the injury happen? It's sort of the question is which injury are you talking about? The Heat started the season, first game of the season against the Orlando Magic. Hassan gets a bone bruise on his left knee, sits out the next 5 games. Then he comes back. We're basically told that everything is fine, that he's good to go. So he plays for a while, and then he starts, it's a game in Utah, I think around November 10th. He says, you know what? My knee's not feeling that good. There's an issue. First bone bruise. Then all of a sudden last week, we wind up getting to New York. Hassan Whiteside's not playing tonight. We're originally told he's not playing because of rest. It was a back-to-back game. They played in Cleveland the night before. Okay, makes sense. Back-to-backs are difficult. He plays hard. And then Hassan tells us, no, my knee doesn't feel right. We need to do something about it. And this is where the questions began. Because at first we were told by Eric Spoelstra, he said, no, this is routine. He doesn't need an MRI. So I made some phone calls the next day. And I called someone and I said, what's going on with Hassan? He's getting an MRI. So all of a sudden, we're told maybe it's a new injury. The Heat call us. They say this is a different injury. When he played against the Boston Celtics, he had a bone bruise. And this is, to me, where it gets a little curious. And they said to me that this is a case, it's a different bone bruise on the same knee. So all of a sudden, you're wondering what's going on here. So I made another phone call, and I said, what's going on? Is the first bone bruise still there? Yes. So here's my question to all of this. Does a bone bruise, is it exacerbated if you keep on playing? Or is a bone bruise something you can play with and it doesn't get any worse? And this is the real issue at hand here. If the answer is the first, is that a bone bruise, it doesn't get any worse if you keep playing, no issue with playing through the first injury and coming back, but then you wonder, why not now? Why can't he do what he did the first time and come back and play? If it does exacerbate your play and the injury, having a bone bruise, and you should sit out, then why did he come back so soon for the first injury? So my question to this whole thing is okay, there are 2 spots on his knee. He has 2 bone bruises. What's the protocol from here? And when he says, I only want to come back when I'm 100%, I can tell you, after 30 years of doing this, no one in the NBA a month in is 100%. So I'm really curious to see how this plays out because it impacts so much of the rest of the rotation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and he's been huge. So, what have the Heat done in response to not having him in the lineup?
Well, and this is sort of part B of the whole equation, and what we're looking at right now is the Heat had Hassan Whiteside, 4 years, $98 million, 2016 offseason, fine. It made all the sense in the world, protect your player. Then they go out in this year's draft and they draft Bam Adebayo, big man out of Kentucky, wonderfully athletic, reminds a lot of people of Dwight Howard. Okay, you have a couple of big men. That makes sense also. Then the Heat go out at the start of free agency. Now they already have Hassan Whiteside, they already have Bam Adebayo, and they say, let's add Kelly Olynyk, big guy from Boston. Remember, he had a huge game against Washington in the playoffs, helped Boston get through last year, so we had that going on. So they do have enough depth at center. My question all year has been this: they have too much depth at center. That a team that is relying so much on small ball and playing otherwise, they couldn't find the minutes for Hassan Whiteside, for Bam Adebayo, for Kelly Olynyk. So this is really a litmus test right now. And I know it sounds almost cold because, again, Hassan went out, he played hard, he got injured. But what if they can survive without Hassan? What if all of a sudden their $98 million player is not as essential as they first thought? They have the youth of Bam Adebayo. We've seen moments with him even guarding on the perimeter. Anyone who watched that Sunday game at American Airlines Arena, there he is isolated on Steph Curry, and Steph Curry can't get a shot off. And we had a similar situation earlier in the week. Bam Adebayo against, you might have heard about him, LeBron James. Couldn't get a shot off. Earlier in that road trip, Jimmy Butler, Minnesota, same thing. couldn't get a shot off against Bam. They switched on the pick and roll, and they took care of him. So you know that he can play NBA-level defense. Kelly Olynyk is playing better now, and he's playing better, I think, for a reason. Without Hassan, there's more minutes. He can feel more comfortable in a rotation role. It's not a matter of you have 48 total minutes, you're trying to break them up with Hassan, with Bam, and with Kelly Olynyk. If you don't get enough minutes, no one's going to get into a rhythm. So now Kelly Olynyk's in a rhythm. So I think this really gets interesting. The longer Hassan stays out, did the Heat say to themselves, you know what? This is working. We can make this work. They lost the game in New York without Hassan, but again, they were adjusting. That was last minute. They won the home game against Charlotte without Hassan, looked pretty good. And even Golden State, to me, it's the best team in the league. It's not the best way to judge your team because it's a case of who beats Golden State anyway? Not even LeBron and the Cavaliers. So when you look at it that way, I think it's a case of they're getting a nice litmus test to assess the other two big men they have. I still think this team does not win without Hassan Whiteside, and maybe it's the opposite. Maybe the Heat come out of all of this and say, you know what? We weren't giving him the ball enough. We weren't playing Hassan enough minutes. He is really valuable to this. So, again, I don't think there's any player that sits there like Hassan and says, man, I hope they fail so I can show my worth. But I think Eric Spoelstra and Pat Riley in the Heat front office, they'll be able to judge and say, we realize how much we miss Hassan Whiteside or how much we don't miss Hassan Whiteside.
And on that note, do we have any idea of when he will be back in the lineup? Are they saying anything about that?
And this is the interesting part of that equation again. Hassan Whiteside told me the other day, Friday, at American Airlines Arena after shoot-around, this time he wants to wait until he's 100%. Well, this is sort of the old saw in all of sports. Do you come back when you feel perfect? Do you come back when your team needs you the most? Or do you come back when you feel you can do something? And there's a great Pat Riley story about this. When he was coaching in New York, one of his players said, I can't go tonight, coach. I don't feel good enough. I'm not myself. I'm not 100%. And Pat Riley went to him. He said, what about at the end of the game, if I need one rebound on one play, can you go out there and get me that rebound? And the player turned to him and said, Coach, well, if you need that, I can go out and I can get that for you. And Pat Riley leaned forward as only Pat Riley can do. And he goes, then get your uniform on and get out there. So I wonder when Eric Spoelstra says to Hassan, when he goes to him, hey, you're good enough. Hassan Whiteside, let's face it, Hassan Whiteside at 70% or 80% is still probably better than 70% or 80% of all NBA centers. So when you look at it that way, you can say, get out there as soon as you can. We need you out there. I think they need Hassan out there. I think Hassan needs to learn. He has his contract now. He has his $98 million. This is not like Isaiah Thomas in Cleveland, who's sitting there right now and going, hey, my payday is coming. I can't come back too soon because I want to show people that in Cleveland I can do what I did in Boston. To me, this is different. Hassan got paid. Think about this. When Hassan Whiteside doesn't play, when he doesn't play, or when he does play, he makes about $240,000. Whether he plays or whether he doesn't play. I think when it comes to that, for that kind of money, that kind of salary, you get your, I don't want to sound too cold here, you get your butt out on the court as soon as you can. So if you're asking me when is he coming back, the Heat are saying a 1 or 2 week rehabilitation period. I think he should be able to come back after that. That would be similar to the timetable of 5 games from the first bone bruise. But I wonder now if it's a little bit mental. I think Hassan gets bothered a little too much if he can't be himself, if another center outplays him, if he's not a dominant big man. I think that's part of maturity. I think you have to grow through that.
Definitely. Well, hopefully he's back sooner rather than later. Let's move to the mailbag. Lots of questions from you guys.
And first of all, it is so nice not to be answering these questions at 2 in the morning. Because what I do when the games are over, because I try to keep it fresh, I'll come back from the arena, make that hour drive back to Broward, and all of a sudden I'm sitting there at 12:30, 1 in the morning answering your questions. So believe me, 1:30 in the afternoon, this is fine. I could have brought a cappuccino, made a day out of it.
Yeah, this is better. We like this. So Fred wants to know, when will the Heat accept that they need a quality backup at point guard? The offense suffers so much when Tyler Johnson subs in for Goran Dragic. He's not the answer.
Yeah, you know, again, it's almost like instead of Ask Ira today, it's become Rant Ira because this has become another one of my sort of saws and pet peeves right here. Mm-hmm. I think Tyler Johnson is a wonderful basketball player. I think Tyler Johnson can help you off the bench. But at some point, he'd have to go, you know what, Tyler Johnson is not a ball handler. He doesn't advance the ball as well. Doesn't have a full set of teeth, as we see right there, but that's another story for another day. I think the Heat need someone who can get this team into offense. What Pat Riley has told us is this. When Goran Dragic goes out of the game, I have Tyler Johnson. I have Dion Waiters. I have Josh Richardson. I have James Johnson. This reminds me of when a coach in college or in the NFL tells his team, we have a bunch of quarterbacks. We have 2 or 3 quarterbacks. Unless you have a definitive answer that this is your ball handler, this is the person advancing the ball, then I think you wind up in trouble. Tyler Johnson's not that guy. A couple of years ago, the Heat had Beno Udre. Ironically, another left-handed Slovenian point guard. Apparently, they collect them all. And I think the offense worked better when they went to the second team. I think what the Heat have to do when they get a chance, whether it's the December 15th trade date when you can move players in the offseason, they have so many power forwards. I mean, they have enough power forwards, we could fill this whole room here, and still probably not get them all in there. They need another point guard, a true NBA playmaker. What guys like Richardson and Waiters and Tyler Johnson and James Johnson are, they're facilitators. But at the moment of truth, to have that innate ability to be a playmaker, to me, that's something you're almost born with. The other guys, they can play that at times. I think the Heat need to look at another point guard, but I've been saying that for years. I believe on an NBA roster, you carry at least 2 true NBA point guards and maybe a third. I think right now you can make an argument they just have one in Goran Dragic.
Wow. All right, our second question from Chadwick and Lake Worth. He wants to know, Bam has Rookie of the Year talent, but he doesn't get any floor time because of the logjam at center/power forward. Could the Heat management not foresee this? And when does Hassan Whiteside get traded for scoring lane?
Well, obviously, we know what this show is going to turn into is everyone asking about trade questions. And it's interesting because when I get questions, I always tell people, look, I'm not going to take your mock trades because I don't know what front offices are thinking. And obviously, there's salary cap involved. There's future cap and tax involved. So there's much more than just who's the best player or who's not the best player. So you have that in play. But I think when you look at a situation like this, it's what I said in the first segment. You have 3 centers, and Eric Spoelstra really honestly is believing that Kelly Olynyk, that Bam Adebayo, and that Hassan Whiteside only are centers. Well, you only have 48 minutes to play those guys. So let's get this straight. You signed Hassan Whiteside for $98 million. You signed Kelly Olynyk for $50 million. You used what you hope will be your last lottery pick in years to bring in someone like Bam Adebayo. So you have all those 3 and only 48 minutes. No one is going to be happy. The Heat started the season. Kelly Olynyk was the opening night power forward alongside Hassan Whiteside. So there was a time when Eric Spoelstra felt comfortable enough that, yes, I can play 2 big guys together. And yet we asked him before the game against the Knicks in New York the other day, would you play a pair of bigs together? And he sort of hedged, and he really hasn't since. So the thing is, if your talent is going to be concentrated in one position, if you say to yourself, we spent $150 million on veterans, we used a first-round pick, you've got to get your guys on the floor. And the thing is, the way the perimeter players are playing, it's not as if any of those other guys, I mean, let's face it, Tyler Johnson has been off a little, Dion Waiters coming off a 1-of-10 game against Golden State. Those guys have been a little bit shaky anyway. The Heat's strength appears to be playing big. And yet the Heat's preference appears to be playing small ball. And until they can sort of get those 2 things in line, I think this roster is a little bit sort of out of whack.
Yeah.
You have the look of Heat fans right now. This is what I get. And please, believe me, people, I answer 3 questions a day. So many of these questions come in duplicate and triplicate. Questions like this. There are a couple of times people have seen in the feature, I'll line up 6 or 7 of the same question just to let people know where the thought is. But that's the one thing about Heat fans. Matter of fact, I had someone the other day, we were in Orlando for the opener, and one of their broadcasters, I'll drop a name, David Steele, comes up to me and he goes, you make up those questions, don't you? And I'm like, no, I have 5,700 in the question queue right now. I don't make up those questions. And he leans forward and he goes, then you have really smart basketball fans. And that's the thing down here. The Heat has built the kind of following, and we see it with X's and Omar. When Omar does the show also, people know this team, people know what they need, and people are knowledgeable. And that's when I'm winding up getting these questions that usually, when I answer one question, if you don't feel like I'm answering your question, I am. I've seen it also. And this has been a theme. No backup point guard. Why so many big men? Heat fans, I think, get it. And I think management obviously has their own reasons. The fans are not dealing with the salary cap. The fans are not dealing with the luxury tax. They don't have to worry about that. The fans are not dealing with feelings about bringing a young player like Bam Adebayo along and not giving him everything and having to pull back a little. But a lot of these questions, like the last 2, that's what I wind up getting in duplicate and triplicate and tenplicate or whatever the word is, because there's really themes of this season already. It's interesting. We're only about 6 weeks in, and already you can see themes.
Absolutely. So the last question we have from the mailbag is from Mark in Grand Prairie, Texas. And he says, Ira, I hope Memphis loses every game for the rest of the season. David Fizdale was done about as dirty as I've seen from an organization. He gave Memphis hope last year against San Antonio in playoffs. It's not his fault the team failed to bring back Zach Randolph, Tony Allen, and Vince Carter, all strong veteran presences and leaders. And this year, suffering the loss of Mike Conley. Is there a place back in Miami for him? And as some of you may remember, he was an assistant with Spoelstra and the Heat for 8 seasons. So will we see him back in Miami?
Well, I think Eric Spoelstra would like him back, but I think David Fizdale might have moved ahead of just being an assistant coach. So I think Fizz sort of sits back right now, gets over the shock of being the second fired coach at the start of the season. Remember, no coaches were fired last season. So this really is something new in the NBA of not having this security. And I think David Fizdale could get a head job and a lead job somewhere else. So Eric Spoelstra told us, look, I would love to have David Fizdale back as an advisor, drink some wine, break some bread with him. But it's interesting because contract-wise, he's getting his money from Memphis. Once he starts working or advising for another team, all of a sudden the Grizzlies can say, well, you have another job. There has to be an offset. We won't pay you as much. He is an NBA-level head coach. He's an NBA-level winner. And like the questioner said there, he's lost so many players. He lost so many veteran players, Zach Randolph and Vince Carter. It wasn't the same team. I think there's a place for David Fizdale, but I think there's a place for him on a stable franchise. Memphis has been sort of this like a bunch of clowns getting out of a Volkswagen, and the turnover in owners. I think they have something like 10 or 15 owners, so it's hard to appease everyone. Yeah, even right now they're in the middle of a sale. There's a show call right now. They said evaluation of the franchise. We'll see who winds up owning it. So what's really fascinating is this. David Fizdale was fired in November by one ownership group, and there's a very good chance by the turn of the year there could be another ownership group in Memphis. Not that they'll bring him back, but that maybe it's going to show this, that David Fizdale was more stable than what the Grizzlies have in place. Look, if he doesn't land a job, if he needs to come back, I think Eric Spoelstra will bring him back. But part of this loyalty is this. Eric Spoelstra is loyal to all his people. So I can't see him saying to Chris Quinn, okay, you need to move behind the bench. Or to Juwan Howard, who might be the next big thing on the Heat staff, okay, you're not the lead assistant anymore. Or Dan Craig won a championship for the Heat's G League affiliate in the developmental league, to push him aside. So I think everything is going to stay copacetic for now. And Eric Spoelstra is basically going to say, this is my staff. We'll see what happens. Next summer, nothing happens with Fizdale. I think, as they call it, the Heat family, they will find a place back on the family tree.
Yeah, well, we'll have to wait and see. So you can still submit questions on YouTube, at sunsentinel.com, or on Twitter with hashtag AskIra. We'll get to more in a second. But as you know, it is the 30th anniversary season for the Miami Heat, and so we're doing a series here at the Sun Sentinel, the Heat at 30. So what do we have for the throwback of this week?
Well, this week I figured the first one we put up, which was earlier at the start of the season, was the Heat's all-time team, their 30th anniversary team. My thought was, who's the best of the best? And we're going to be running lists during the season. Matter of fact, this weekend, Sunday, Sun Sentinel, we had the all-time best point guards. We will get to all of those. But I wanted to start with that, hey, if this is like the NBA, and we had to do our all-NBA team, but let's do it for 30 years. Let's look back at the history of this franchise and see where we can go. So I went with a first team, a second team, and a third team, and I got some people angry, but to me, this is all consensus kind of stuff when you look at it. So my first team, starting off there, to me, it's the franchise big man. It was Alonzo Mourning. It was the guy who really brought the heart to the Heat and what he delivered when Pat Riley arrived. I had him as my all-time Heat starting center. With the forwards, well, you know what? If Alonzo Mourning represented history, then the next step to me would be the forwards, and I went with LeBron James and Chris Bosh, because there has never been a better 4-year period for this franchise. 4 trips to the NBA Finals, consecutive NBA championships in 2012 and 2013. And honestly, for both of them, we see even Dwayne in the picture over there, it ended too suddenly. Chris Bosh with the blood clots forced out, his Heat career, and likely his NBA career over. And LeBron James, as stunning as his arrival in 2010 when he left Cleveland, all of a sudden for him to wind up leaving again in 2014, going back to Cleveland. I mean, it was odd. I was in the Cavaliers locker room last week, and to look on the left and see LeBron, and look on the right and see Dwayne Wade, it's like, wait a minute, guys, you got the wrong jersey hanging there. I mean, it was a bit surreal. So Dwayne, my all-time shooting guard on that first team, obviously the greatest player in franchise history. No question that his jersey goes up in the rafters, alongside Hardaway, alongside Alonzo Mourning, obviously I think eventually alongside Bosh and LeBron James. But here's my question. If this team is to build a statue, we have the iconic Michael Jordan out front, United Center in Chicago. We have in LA Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Magic Johnson, Shaquille O'Neal. I really wonder if the first statue in the history of the Miami Heat shouldn't be Dwayne Wade, even with the way he left, the fact that he went to Chicago, went back home, the fact that he went to Cleveland. Rounded out that first unit with Tim Hardaway, the first guy, point guard, who really made all the big shots. You go back to those series against the Knicks, for all the struggles, it was Tim Hardaway who really stepped up. Second team, a lot of people said this should have been reversed, that Shaquille O'Neal was the linchpin to the revival of the Heat when he arrived in that diesel truck and that super soaker, say that 5 times fast, when he was on Biscayne Boulevard and greeted by the fans. I have him as my second team center. Forwards there, Glenn Rice, we forget about his outside shooting. The first real marksman for the Heat we could see there, that great release, hit some big shots, and then Udonis Haslem. And people might say, whoa, look at Udonis' stats. How is this guy, whether it's the braids or something a little more recent, how is this guy right now someone you consider among your all-time greatest players? You know what? Sometimes staying in the same place for 15 years, for being part of that lineage, it matters a lot. A lot of NBA teams are retired numbers of players simply because they've stayed. I think that should be the case with him. And my second team guards, everyone forgets about Eddie Jones. Local product. Pompano Beach, went to school here, still lives in Weston. Those were the bridge years for the Heat. That was between the Knicks' great playoff series and then Shaquille arriving and LeBron and Chris Bosh. They needed that one steady player. He was sort of the mentor to Dwayne Wade. I don't think he should be forgotten. I think for a lot of teams, he might even be first team. Sherman Douglas, the general, I have as the point guard, as the second all-time team. He arrived as a second-round pick and really was the first point guard to get the Heat into offense, going to the third team now. Hassan Whiteside, we've talked about him, I think, in every segment so far today. Look, I know he's relatively recent, but the Heat have never had a big man like this, is dynamic. It's as much as Alonzo Mourning gave you, this is so much more length. He can be so much more impactful right now, really, I think, than Zoe on both ends of the court. My third team forwards, P.J. Brown, again, those great Knicks rivalries and what they went through. I'll never forget P.J. Brown picking up Charlie Ward, former Heisman-winning quarterback for Florida State, and literally flipping him like a top at the height of the Heat-Knicks playoff rivalry. P.J. Brown was one of those guys, if Pat Riley asked him to run through a wall, he would turn around and go, how many walls do you want me to run through? He was that kind of player. So I would have him there, Jamal Mashburn, the great versatility. And my last two players, the backcourt, Steve Smith, the first sort of combo guard, really what the Heat's trying to use today. And the last player, iconic, greatest shot in Miami Heat franchise history, and that's Ray Allen. And of course, everyone remembers against the San Antonio Spurs, 2013 NBA Finals, Game 6. They're lining up with those ropes around the court. We're about to coronate the San Antonio Spurs as NBA champions. And Ray Allen goes out there. The Heat need to get ahead or at least hit a shot to tie. He steps back. He hits his three-pointers. And I am assuming this is a family show, so I can't say exactly what Ray Allen said, but basically it was get those, fill in the word here, ropes off the court. The Heat tied that game on Ray Allen's shot. They won in overtime, forced Game 7, won their second consecutive championships in 2013. If a place on a Heat's all-time team could be dependent on one single shot, then I say let it be the biggest single shot in franchise history. So even though there might have been some ugly history after Ray Allen left, I think he deserves, even for as brief as a tenure as he had, a spot on the Heat's all-time top 3 teams.
All right. That's great. Thanks so much for that. We're looking forward to the series continuing to celebrate that 30th anniversary.
And feel free to write in and let me know why I'm totally wrong.
We have a couple of viewer questions, a lot about trades. We've
Sure.
got plenty of time before the trade deadline, but I think people are still pretty eager. One of the viewers wants to know, how would you grade Justice Winslow's progress in terms of his shooting? And the second part, would you pull the plug and trade him?
And it's a timely question. I actually just posted a story on SunSentinel.com. This is one of those toughest things I think people in all sports front offices have to do. You make a draft pick, you take someone in the lottery, you make an investment in someone. What's the statute of limitations on that? When do you say to yourself, okay, are we investing too much time? Are we putting too much into this one player? I think that's where the Heat stand with Justice Winslow right now. I'm not saying he's not a quality player. I'm not saying he can't rebound. I'm not saying he can't defend. I'm not saying he can't be a hustle player, but he can't score. So right now you're playing him with Josh Richardson in the starting lineup. And especially now with Hassan Whiteside out, you're playing him with Bam Adebayo. You're not getting that offense. It's really curious. I'd almost say this, and I've mentioned this in Ask Ira a few times already. Could the Heat find a way to pull back on Justice Winslow? To say, you know what, we're going to go 2-3 games, maybe a week or so without Justice and see if we can recapture that chemistry. Because keep in mind, last season, when they went on that run at the end of the season and they went 30-11, Justice Winslow was out. He wasn't part of that team. He had a shoulder surgery in January. So now they're trying to work someone back in. And it was interesting because Dion Waiters told us on Saturday before the Warriors game, he said, look, everyone thinks we have the same team. We don't. We're working in different players. Justice Winslow is here. Kelly Olynyk is here. Bam Adebayo is here. So you can have mostly the same players, and you still can dramatically impact the chemistry. So what I would say about this, about Justice Winslow, it's nothing personal. It doesn't mean he still can't have a fine NBA career. But I think Eric Spoelstra, Pat Riley, Andy Ellisberg, and the Heat front office have to ask themselves this one fundamental question. Are the Miami Heat better with Justice Winslow on the floor, or the Miami Heat better the way they finished the second half of last season? You can play it out a little bit longer, but eventually you have to say to yourself, we're trying to get to the playoffs. We're trying to win. What's our best chemistry? You know what? Sometimes you can't let feelings get in the way.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how things go. That is all we have for viewer questions for today. Ira, thank you so much for joining us in the studio. We're so excited to get this started, and continue to submit those questions. He does get a lot, but we'll look at all of them, and we'll be doing this again next week. I think that's all we have. So thank you so much.
Glad to be here, and hopefully next time I come back, we'll talk about a Heat winning streak or something like that. Or else, you know what? We'll just trade them all.
There we go. Thanks so much for joining, and we'll see you again next week.
Thank you.